Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Anna Swardinsky. I am CADRE's Director of Planning, Training, and Community Resilience, and it is 9:01, so we'll go ahead and get underway. I do have CADRE's Executive Director, Marcia Hovey, joining us in just a few moments after she does school drop-off. And so how about if we get underway with having you all introduce yourself in the chat box while I give you our welcome remarks. If you could put in the chat the name of your organization, and the name of your organization, and your relationship to emergency planning for your own agency or organization. That'll help us out today. And I'll keep letting folks in on the waiting room. I'm kind of running solo this morning, so be patient with me as I multitask. Let's see. In terms of housekeeping, we have a number of things running today. As you heard me just mention, we are recording today's session. The PowerPoint and the recording for today will be posted to our CADRE website under our preparedness tab at the top of the screen, and you can scroll all the way down to webinars and find it there. It'll also be listed within one of the preparedness topics. In terms of our Zoom basics, we are running Otter AI live transcript, both within the Zoom platform and as a separate Otter artificial intelligence platform. So you are welcome to toggle that on or off at your desire. If you have any accessibility needs, please be sure to just direct message me and I'll help you out as best I can as the program continues. Okay. We do ask if you do want to speak aloud, if you will raise your hand with your Zoom controls and I'll call on you. If you are going to speak aloud, if you wouldn't mind turning on your camera, that would help us all as well to know who's speaking. And with that, let me continue moving us forward. We are here. This is the third session in our series of webinars that are funded for the South Bay community of Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. And these workshops that we are offering this fall are funded by a group called the Bay Area UASI, which stands for the Bay Area Urban Areas Security Initiative, and part of what's called the Bay Area Training and Exercise Program. If you are joining us from a community outside of our 4 South Bay counties, please know that these workshops and topics are being covered across the 12-county Greater Bay Area. And if you want more information about workshops being targeted for your geographic area, you can put that in the chat or direct message me and we'll connect you up with the trainers focusing on your area. Okay. So for today's topic, we are talking about continuity of operations planning for nonprofits. And so the objectives of today's session are what you see on the screen. We'll start off with, what is a COOP and why is it important? We'll explore some of the different planning elements and learn how to help you improve your agency's readiness and resilience. And then we will have you guys, work with one another and dialogue a little bit about your own planning efforts. We here at CADRE, we don't profess to know everything about this. You are the experts for your own constituents and your own audiences. And so we welcome your participation in today's program as well to share information and as we move along. So, any questions for me? You can go ahead and raise your hand at this moment. If you came to today's workshop with a specific question regarding continuity of operations planning or emergency planning in general for your own organization, please feel free to put that in the chat box and we'll do our best to address direct questions. And I think that's it for right now. So let's keep moving forward. The way we have today's program mapped out is we're wrapping up our welcome and introductions. We're going to do a little reflection for just a few moments, and then I'll get into the content of, what is a continuity of operations plan. We'll dig deeper using the workbook planning guide that CADRE has put together, and I'll share that link for you in just a moment. And then we'll ask you guys to contribute towards the end of today's program on what you're doing within your own organizations to build your readiness and resilience, and any advice or tips or challenges and successes that you're experiencing for your own programs, okay? So right now we're a relatively small group. I think we're about 20, 22 folks. So, you know, we'll try and keep this as interactive as we can. And as I said before, feel free to raise your hand with your Zoom button. If I'm not seeing you, go ahead and unmute yourself and just kind of jump in, okay? Because I don't have all my extra helpers today. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box to get us underway, so I will keep moving forward. So let's start with a little reflection. When you think about continuity of operations, when you think about planning for and being able to serve the community, what do you wish you knew last March before the pandemic hit us? Or what kind of things have you learned since then that you wish you had planned for? Go ahead and use the chat, or if that's difficult for you, feel free to raise your hand and come off mute. We just want to have a little opening reflection. I think I went too far on my slides. So the questions are, what do you wish you knew before the pandemic last March? Or what do you wish you had planned for before we experienced in the last year, the wildfires or any kind of public safety power shutoff? Anybody offering up some thoughts? You guys typing? Wave at me if you're still typing. There we go. And Marcia, good morning, welcome. She wrote in, not enough pre-disaster discussion about how government would support nonprofits. Go ahead and unmute, Marcia, and you can say good morning. I said you were doing school drop-off and would be joining us as soon as you got to your desk.
I was, and good morning, everybody. It's nice to be back at my desk now and out of the traffic. Yeah, I just think that there were some assumptions about how government and nonprofits would work together in a disaster. I'm thinking in particular in the logistics function, like when we ran out of N95 masks and there was no process in place to do resource requests with government. So we will work that out now. As usual, after the disaster, we'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you for that. Greg, would you like to come off mute and say a few words? You put something in the chat for us.
I don't really have anything to add. It's just that, especially in this part of the country, this part of the world where we don't always have air conditioning, so we rely on the doors and windows, or the windows being open at night to keep things cool. That wasn't possible when the smoke was really bad. So I feel like we were ill prepared for that.
Okay, and Greg, what organization are you with?
University Lutheran Church in Palo Alto.
Wonderful, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna pick on Laurel, my good friend Laurel with Uplift. You wanna come off mute, say a few words?
Good morning, Anna. Yeah, there's so many things, in retrospect that we've dealt with over the last year and a half since COVID hit. But the primary for us would have been if we would have been better prepared for our staff to be able to utilize telehealth, and not only training for the staff, but also communication and training for all of our customers that we have. So it was a learning experience. And one of the learning experiences also was a large organization. It usually takes us months to implement something new, especially something as big as telehealth, and how quickly we were able to implement It wasn't smooth, but it was out of necessity, and we responded. But it sure would have been nice if we would have been prepared, especially the communication piece, right? And the dealing with the crisis with our families, being able to deal with them when we couldn't do face-to-face services. And I'm with Uplift Family Services.
Thank you, Laurel. And let me have Rob be our last reflection sharing. Rob with San Jose Conservation Corps, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And I just said how much our operations shifted because of changing needs. We refocused on conservation and a lot of work for young people in need of support. But we ended up operating 3 homeless shelters and like a large scale food boxing operation because the needs of the community changed so much. And that wasn't something that we had ever done before. And so it was definitely, building the plane while it was flying. And if we would have realized how much that could be a need, we could have planned for that a little better.
Okay, thanks so much for that sharing. What I just put in the chat box is for those of you who didn't get a chance yet to download, we're going to be talking about the Agency Emergency Planning Workbook and some pieces that are included in that. So if you don't yet have that downloaded to your computer, you might want to hit that link I just put in the chat box. And let me start us off with, oh, I just noticed I'm covering up part of the video. I apologize for that. I'm going to play a short little video clip for you that will kind of kick us off with this topic of continuity of operations planning. And yes, I love that you guys keep using the chat box and sharing information, and we'll pause here and there and have you guys come off mute. So let me change over a screen and get a little video to play for you. Give me just one moment.
Hi, I'm Pat Corcoran from IBM Business Continuity and Resiliency Services. Today I'm going to talk to you about some of the key things to look for from business continuity for nonprofit organizations. The first and most important area is mission. Everybody has to have a mission, and everybody needs to understand it. It doesn't need to be long, it needs to be simple, quick, and to the point. But that mission is your foundation of how you do things, why you do things, and how you support your constituency and all the people who provide funds to you. It helps them understand the value you bring to the table. So mission statement number 1. Number 2, when you look at the organizations, your people are the most important asset that everybody has. You need to understand what role they play. They need to understand what role they play in supporting the mission of your agency, your organization. And when you look at business continuity, they need to understand how the business continuity plan supports the mission and what role they play in supporting that area. That everybody, I mean everybody, plays a role when it comes to looking at risk, looking at business continuity, and supporting the overall mission of the agency. The third area is risk. When you look at risk, it's important to look at not just natural disasters. Everybody thinks of natural disasters, but those are the easy ones. There could be many other things like, just in employee personnel doing things that they shouldn't do, software or hardware. So you need to understand what risk you're most vulnerable to, which ones could have the biggest impact during different scenarios. So when you look at strategy, you look at organization, the next key thing is risk. Understanding which risks are you most vulnerable to, why, and how would you prioritize those. The fourth area is processes. So now you understand your mission, you understand the organization, you understand your risk. Which processes are the most important for you? It could be fundraising, it could be the food bank, it could be providing information to customers, it's working with the government. There's all kinds of different business processes that you need to look at and understand which ones are important, which ones would be vulnerable to which risk, and how would it impact the overall mission of your agency. And when you're looking at business processes or agency processes, you also want to look at your supply chain, because you may be dependent on organizations like telecom, like fuel, or whatever it may be, an internet company. You need to understand how they could impact your operations. And then the fifth area, you take all this information, strategy, organization, processes, and risk. Bring it all together, and now you have the information where you can create a business continuity plan to help your agency ensure that their information will be available when you need it, especially during a crisis, because you are the organization that most people are looking for during a crisis. So they expect.
No, hang on one second. Hopefully that painted a little bit of a picture for you on how we can get underway with this topic. So if you could use your Zoom thumbs up feature. Give me a thumbs up if you were here with us for our training on August 24th, I think it was, where we did this self-assessment tool for your own organization. Give me a thumbs up if you were here. Well, and then I'll know if we need to back up a little bit and share some of these concepts. I have only a couple of you responding. Let me see. Okay. All right. So what we did here for those of you who weren't with us when we kicked off our first session on agency emergency planning is we had sent off this self-assessment tool with the instructions and asked everybody to take a few moments to think about their own organization's readiness, think about what planning you have done, and this coloring exercise was a way to reflect on where you are in your own organization's planning. And so if you haven't done it, I've put it in the chat box. There's a link to the coloring triangle and also a link to this next slide of the each of those boxes in that triangle are explained in a little more detail. The way this works is we wanted you to think about those planning elements that you feel like you have a good handle on, and you would kind of mark that with a green marker or crayon. And if you're having discussions, it's currently something that you're talking about, working on, that would be an in progress, something you'd highlight in yellow. And the red are what we call planning gaps. Those are the things I like to call what keeps you up at night. You know, when you think about an emergency or a disaster happening in our community, as you think about our ongoing response and recovery to COVID or fires, smoke, any of those things, what are the things you feel like your organization has not yet addressed or done some planning for? And those are the things we want to help you make some progress on when we look at this self-assessment tool. It's an exercise you can do yourself for your own organization, but I also actively encourage you to take this back to your leadership or management level meetings and ask them to reflect on that and then do some sharing. One of the things we've often found with emergency planning for our nonprofit and faith groups is there's a lot of institutional knowledge in your organizations that just isn't documented. And so other folks might have some information that perhaps you don't. Oh, yes, we do have, you know, our emergency procedures kind of thought about, or we are well aware of what hazards we face. We just haven't kind of put pen to paper with that, or we know exactly who we're going to coordinate with. Or how we're going to manage donations, but maybe we haven't documented those things. So those are examples of how you can begin this conversation and process of emergency planning and looking at your continuity of operations for your organization. Let's talk for a moment about the difference between disaster response planning and continuity of operations planning. Marcia, do you want to spend a few moments talking on this slide for us?
I can. I'm not seeing a slide.
Am I not sharing that? Oh, I'm so sorry, folks. I thought I hit the share button and here I was just talking at you. Is that up now?
Yes.
All right, my apologies, everybody.
Okay, so sometimes it sounds like we're planning for the same things, that, you know, a disaster happens and there are things that we have to get up and running again. But the disaster response itself, it's more about what are you doing in this moment to make things, to save lives and property in the environment and make sure that your staff are safe. And usually they only last a little bit of time. They don't last 18 to 24 months. And you have the alert and warning system. You have community emergency response team volunteers and the Red Cross doing their things to reduce the immediate impact and to stop the threat. But then for continuity of operations, it's like, okay, the immediate threat has stopped, but now what happens? What is the impact to our operation? And can we continue to serve the public the way that we did before? So you're thinking more about, what are our key operations? What's it going to take to get them up and running again? Just like the video said, are we dependent on power? And so then we need to know what the plan is for power. Are we dependent on internet? And what is our plan for our internet providers? And then so it's focusing on taking a look at what backup plans you need to have in place to be able to continue to do your key services, not all services, because the disaster will, clean itself up and things will get repaired usually within a month, usually. And so you just want to make sure that you have a short-term fix to keep doing the critical services that you need to do. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Marcia. And so when we think about a COOP is a documented and trained and tested plan that helps your organization continue to provide essential services, oftentimes with limited resources and under some challenging or duress situations. So the COOP would answer the following question you see on your screen. In the event of, whether that's a pandemic, a power outage, how will you and your colleagues continue to provide the services and care for your organization's clients and constituents? That's what a COOP focuses on. And so when we start at this planning triangle that we have folks think about with your own emergency planning, we start with focusing on life safety and survival actions, because if you haven't already noticed, let me actually pause for a second. Did you guys download the workbook that was in the email yesterday and or in the link today? Because we're going to be referencing certain pages of that workbook. So if you have an opportunity, if you didn't print it out, you might want to kind of pull up a window on your screen and have that workbook nearby, because we're going to reference some of the different workbook tools in there. So along the bottom of this triangle is the emergency coordination team, the emergency alert and notification, emergency procedures. Those are all things that are part of what should be thought of as your emergency guide as a disaster is happening. The COOP components in this first tier are the last two to the far right, thinking about resilient facilities and your hazard assessment. So what does your physical environment look like and how will it support your safety? If you have the planning guide, we're talking about page 19 of this planning guide will help you document your facility and contact information and give you some tools to put that into a go kit in case you need to quickly leave your facility and start up your operations somewhere else. It'll walk you through how you can look at your facility for potential hazards. Things like when we think about an earthquake, are there things behind you that might fall? I'm gonna pick on David because he has his video window open. David McCreef, he's got a big bookshelf behind him, and I'm assuming that's not a virtual background. If we had an earthquake, would those books fall forward onto him, potentially injuring him? Looks like Rob has a nice clear background behind him. And similarly with coal, but some of you could think about, what are the safety hazards that you need to think about when you're talking about your own organization's buildings. How will you perform your services if you need to relocate somewhere else? And so if you have the workbook open and you're looking at page 19, if you flip over, there's a next page will show a facility and agency contact worksheet and a facility hazard checklist that you can look at. And I put those pictures up on your screen right now for you. This is a part of what's called mitigation in disaster planning. And I see Cole standing up. Maybe he's mitigating his environment right now a little bit, making himself a little safer. But these are sample pages from the workbook that we sent out a link to you all, and it's also in the chat box. Another way that you can also look at making your environment safer is to look around at the other hazards and threats that your organization might face. So what are some different hazards that we face here in our South Bay community? Use the chat box and tell me, what kind of disasters or hazards do we face? They could be external or they could be internal. Mauricio, floss? Come off mute and tell me what that means. Oh, floods. Okay. All right. Yes, we are susceptible to flooding in Santa Clara County. Thank you for that, Mauricio. What other kinds of things? Fires, earthquakes, power outages. Yes, Cole, great comment. Mitigation. If you have large objects like a television on a wall, having straps, bookcases, bolted, flooding within a building. Yes, how many of us have had a pipe break and some other kind of flood or water damage going on? Oh, Laurel, pandemics. Yes, we face pandemics. How many of us have had some kind of technology challenges? With cybersecurity, yes. Cyber attacks, cybersecurity, we've seen some of that on the news. Norma with City of Sunnyvale, you want to come off mute, say a few words? Are you able to come off mute, Norma? Oops. Maybe she's not able to in her environment. Okay, so Norma added civil unrest, air quality issues. Jenny's offering up security, doors that don't lock and allow the public to enter. Yes, those are clear hazards or concerns we want to think about. Jenny, can you come off mute and talk to us a little bit about, tell us about those doors that don't lock.
Yeah, they were just recently fixed, but the doors weren't even there to begin with, and so anybody could wander off the streets, which meant anybody could be wandering through the building, and you don't know where they're gonna go, what they might do, and usually they're just using the bathroom. But yeah, like Laurel just mentioned right now, active shooter. My mom was actually in Navy Yard when there was that active shooter with somebody who was able to enter a government building because their security allowed him. He was able to access the doors. So yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. And Jenny, what organization are you with?
I'm with the American Red Cross Silicon Valley chapter.
All right, thank you. I knew that. I was just asking you to share for everybody else.
Thank
you. Laurel, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the person that put in about civil unrest. When all of the social and civil unrest was occurring last year, there were a very small group of us that got together that put together a plan for the agency and for all of our direct service staff. And I just have to say, having business continuity and disaster plans in place was the foundation for the work that we did for the social unrest plans that we rolled out to the whole agency. So just a thank you to CADRE, because you've been with us, you know, every step of the way for the last few years, but it was pretty, it was still a lot of work, but having that foundation there was just hugely helpful. So
Thank you, Laurel. And she brings up a good point, is that when we talk about emergency planning, we talk about continuity of operations planning, we really want to advocate and encourage you to think about this in a multi-hazard way. We're not asking you to write a plan that's just about earthquakes or just about pandemics or just about fires, but that the kind of planning that you focus on is really meant to address all different kinds of hazards. And so when something that we hadn't yet thought about intentionally, whether that was a pandemic or a civil unrest, hopefully your planning principles and kind of some of the guidance that you put together are applicable. Yes, Greg, you're asking, is there a fillable version of this workbook? Yes, thank you for the question. You were able to download a PDF, and if you want the Word file, all you have to do is email us at admin@cadresv.org, and we will send you out the Microsoft Word version. You can change out your logo, you can fill in the answers to your workbook in there. Now, what I want to caution is the workbook is a planning tool. If you're working to build an emergency plan and a continuity of operations plan, ask also for the plan outline, and it'll tell you exactly where you would put that information into a plan, a more traditional plan document. So the workbook is to kind of get you to answer questions, go through some of the planning steps, and then you'll summarize your answers into a paragraph or two, and we'll tell you exactly where that goes in a more traditional plan document. So great, thank you for asking that. So when I go back to my PowerPoint, if we were here in person, oh, Marcia, can you put the email in our chat box for our participants? So I'll keep going. Or Rich, either one of you. There you go. All right, so if we were in person, what we would sometimes do on this little activity is take you to this worksheet that you see on your screen and actually have you walk around your building, walk around your office and do a hazard hunt. You could do that. We're still in September, we're still in preparedness month. So maybe you might want to, copy this or print out this worksheet and take advantage of this activity in preparedness month to have your staff or your managers do a hazard hunt and look around and see what kinds of things in your work environment might be a hazard and how might you address that. So you can look at high, medium, and low, the likelihood that something like that would happen for your workspace or where you are geographically in your county, and then looking at the impact that has on your facility or your organization and the impact that particular kind of event or disaster might have for your clients or staff, okay? There are really two steps in this. It's what are the likely disasters, which part of that disaster will impact you. So for instance, for an earthquake, it might be building damage. You might have power outages. You might have your internet go down. During the pandemic, many of us are continuing to provide our services remotely. So what does that mean in terms of your client contact, your ability to have connections if your clients don't necessarily have reliable internet access? So that's what we're talking about when we look at resilient facilities and a hazard assessment. And so using the chat box, or you can raise your hand on screen. Who works from home still in this COVID-19 environment? I'm seeing a couple of hands and fingers raised. We're not just planning for our offices any longer. We have to think about our home office now. And so, what kinds of things come up as you think about being resilient in your home office environment? Any thoughts? Yep, I'm seeing people in there. Neelam, you want to come off mute and tell us who you work for and what kind of services, and you're now doing that from home?
Hi there, I work for Home First, and
Okay.
my role is to write documents. So I'm a content developer, and I work from home, and I'm still thinking about what kind of hazards do we face at home.
Okay. All right, great.
At
Thank
home also, we could you could face the same as maybe a carbon monoxide or fire, something to that effect.
Right. Good, good. Thank you for chiming in, Neelam. We're seeing in the chat box other comments about thinking about an ergonomics in your own work environment. When you're working from home, or do you have stairs, slips, trips, falls, other things that we may rely on others in a more business or commercial space to have thought about, but when we're in our homes, those are some of the things we need to be considering. Let's see. What else do I have on this slide? So how can you reduce or eliminate the threats? And what kind of alternate facility arrangements might you have in place for your organization or your staff if you are a manager for your program? Okay. So when I talk about alternate facilities, that's part of continuity of operations planning as well. So when you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about alternate facilities, how much space is needed, what kind of location or traffic patterns or needs, are there any security issues that you need to be considering, and special needs like refrigeration or secure areas to store records or files, Wi-Fi and internet access. How many of us, I am thinking, didn't necessarily have the best Wi-Fi or internet connections when we were all like immediately locked down and working from home? Those are some alternate facility considerations. Thanks, David. He's saying all those bookcases behind his head are strapped to the wall. And so good job, David. You've already addressed one of those things in your work environment. When we talk about alternate facilities, these are some of the considerations. How do you go about executing use of an alternate facility is what you document in your continuity of operations plan. So if any of you have an alternate facility identified, raise your hand so you can share that with the group. But you're really wanting to follow some of these steps on the screen. You want to notify the alternate facility that you're going to be coming over, deploy your team to set up that space, and notify staff who might be working at an alternate facility. Okay, anybody have pre-identified for themselves an alternate facility? I'm going to pick on a little bit. Mauricio, do you want to talk with us a little bit about the work Loaves and Fishes does? And I think at one point you had an alternate facility identified. Talk to us a little bit.
Good morning, Anna. We had a couple of we're Loaves and Fishes Family Kitchen. We provide about an average of 7,000 meals to about 30 organizations every day. Most of that gets cooked in our facility in Morgan Hill, current facility in Morgan Hill. And yes, we had identified a couple different commercial kitchens that we could rent in case we needed to, that something happened to that one and we needed to, find an alternative place to cook. So we did that, and we haven't had to pull that trigger, which is a good thing, but we did had a couple different locations set up. The one part of that, it was a little harder to establish, but we also did find some partnerships, is alternate storage for freezer and fridge inventory, right? So that was one of those things that it was a little harder, but we were able to talk to a couple of companies that, said, hey, that in a pinch, we can allow you to have a corner here in a walk-in freezer type of thing or whatever. So yeah, some of that we have not had to do, but yes, it was a good exercise to put that together and understand the limitations of that kind of situation, right? Because it's not as simple as it might sound, or it's easy to put together. But yeah, it was a great exercise to do that at the beginning of the pandemic and through a couple other opportunities we had.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Mauricio. And
thank you, Anna.
Yeah, I remember pre-pandemic working with Mauricio down in the southern part of Santa Clara County as they were exploring these concepts. So for those of you on today's line, if you are looking for an organization that's successfully gone through these discussions, Mauricio is one of your guys. Okay.
Thank you.
So talk to us, if you don't have an alternate facility identified, what do you see as some of the challenges or reasons that your organization has not yet considered identifying an alternate facility? What holds you up, or what are you facing as a challenge? Any of you want to chime in on that? Anyone? Okay, I'm gonna keep going then, because I don't know what you're facing for your challenges. So, but feel free to put something in the box. What you see on your screen is a worksheet from a sister project to CADRE. It's called ENLA, Emergency Network Los Angeles, and I'm going to put in the chat box a link right there for ENLA's nonprofit continuity and recovery planning document. They have kind of a workbook, kind of like the one we shared with you for CADRE, and they have a page in there to help you think about all the different considerations for an alternate temporary location. So just some other ways of approaching this, looking at the site assessment, point of contact, documenting those things, giving you a list of elements to think about and a place to fill that in, and then you'll convert that all over into your plan document when you get to summarizing that information. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving forward, and we're going up the tier into reestablishing operations and service delivery. And these are kind of at the heart of a continuity of operations plan document. We can't stress enough how important it is to think about these things ahead of time and have some clarity about these things before a disaster or emergency happens. And the very first one is the disaster mission statement, and defining the role that you'll play in an emergency or disaster becomes the foundation of all of the planning work that follows that. So in the chat box, if any of you have a disaster mission statement, will you please share that with us? If you know what it is, a disaster mission statement often will require some type of a group discussion involving your agency or organization's leadership. It should be a clear, concise, and meaningful statement about what your agency's role will be in an emergency or a disaster for your clients and for the community. So some of the questions on this workbook page we ask you to think about and talk with your leadership about are: what services must continue following a community emergency? There may be services that your organization or agency provides that could kind of go on hold or suspend for a time, and in kind of the height of an emergency or disaster. How will you support your clients? Will you support all of your same clients? Will you have an ability to expand your client base? Will an emergency cause an increase in the demand for the type of services that you provide? And will you be able to support the greater good, such as your neighborhood, your community, your city, county, or larger? Okay. I'm not seeing anybody put a mission statement in the chat box, but I'm going to give you a couple on screen here that are samples, and we will be sending out this PowerPoint. A disaster mission statement is not necessarily something that needs to be a lengthy document or it's a couple of sentences or a few bullets that summarize your agency's role, and it's really blurry. I'm sorry that the slide is really blurry. We will, let me see if I can zoom in on this. Oops. Oh, I went too far. Sorry, we're talking about essential services. We'll send this out as a separate handout as well. We'll post that out, the sample statements. But I think we have a couple of people online today who have done this exercise. I don't know if I want to pick on Mauricio or Laurel. I'm pretty sure you guys have a disaster mission statement. If any of the rest of you might be willing to share yours and type it in the box, that would be really helpful for folks to see. I can also, in a few moments, I'm going to show you another part of that IBM video clip where they talk about one of their food banks, and they talk about this and share a little bit more. So part of what goes along with your disaster mission statement then is identifying what are those essential services that your organization needs to continue to provide. And so when you think about your disaster mission, then you're going to identify ideally 2 or 3. It could be a few more, but it all depends on how large your organization is. What are the essential services? And so you're going to list these things. You're going to think about what kind of critical material resources are necessary to maintain these services, and would you be able to provide the same services, or would they be limited in some way? Knowing your agency's priorities ahead of time will help you in the moment of a crisis to be clear on your priorities and help you make the best decisions that you can for your agencies. So you could break it down further. For example, if you provide food to the community, is there a scarcity of food? What is most critical? How would you also be providing water along with that food in certain types of emergencies? If you could only do one thing as a service provider, what would that be? And then once you've defined what those essential services are, you need to figure out what are the things that support your ability to provide those essential services. So they could be things like HR and payroll. If you have to pay bills and order supplies, how would you do that? Who has like check signing authority? Who has access to and responsibility for accounts payables and accounts receivables? Is your website a critical component of how you deliver your services? If so, how do you shore that up? How will you handle purchasing or reimbursement procedures? Those are all part of your essential administrative functions considerations. And depending on the type of services that you provide, something like public information and how you handle the media could also be a function that you need to plan for ahead of time. Okay. Any thoughts, questions? Okay, you guys are such a quiet group today. I was talking about public information and communications kind of leads right into this. How do you ensure that you have the information you need to communicate with your staff and clients? And do you have a method to do so? We talked a lot about this in our CADRE tabletop exercise that was held earlier this month. Marcia, do you want to come off mute and talk a little bit about some of the things we worked on with communications during our tabletop exercise?
Wow. Yeah, let me think back. So we talked about creating, well, a telephone tree, if you will, but it would probably be via internet, where we would push information out, and then it would be pushed out from nonprofits to their clients, constituents, as a trusted provider to try to get the message deeper into the community. We talked about being able to translate materials into more languages. talked about getting the word out to have everyone sign up for Alert SCC, which is the county's notification system, because we have less than 10% of the population is actually going to get the alert messages right now. Talked about the coordination calls that would happen between CADRE and nonprofits to share information and communicate, and receiving information from nonprofits that we can push forward to government to make sure that everyone understands the full impact. That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Awesome. Some of you were probably there with us. Any thoughts you have as well about communications or challenges that you're facing? Did you come today with a question that you want to pose to us or to the group on communications? We're spending a lot of time talking at you. We want to hear what you want to know about or what you want to dig in a little deeper on.
Hey, Anna.
Yes.
Pastor Greg was asking for a fillable version of the workbook. I'm trying to find it on the website. Do you know where it is on our website?
Yeah, we'll email it out. I don't know
Okay.
that the Word version is up on the website. We have the PDF version, but
Okay.
we'll get that sent to him directly by email.
Yeah, my sense is probably everyone would like to see that. So
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so communications. Who feels like they've done this really well or has some challenges that you want to talk about? This session is for you. So you got to tell us what you want to hear about, what you want to, what you're struggling with, or how we can support you. In the workbook are a number of other templates that you can use for communication kind of logs of tracking how you can communicate with staff, with volunteers, with clients. What are some of the different communication methods that you might consider using beyond just texting and cell phone? Are you communicating using any kind of social media with ham radios? Are you using any of the other, kind of website tools? So what are some of the methods and who is it that you need to communicate with? So these planning worksheets are in your guidebook. Okay. All right. So the next topic deals with staffing and volunteers. And probably one of the most important assets you have are your staff and volunteers. And so this planning element will help you focus on making them feel valued, keeping them clear on expectations, and also thinking about whether or not your organization has the ability to take on spontaneous volunteers in an emergency or disaster, and what kind of resources and support volunteers could offer to help you maximize your ability to serve the community. So when we talk about staff, encouraging staff to have an emergency plan at home, and what will do they have small children or older adults that they're caring for that need to take into consideration whether or not they're able to fully either come to the office or need some kind of alternate work schedule to maximize their contributions. I see a hand raised. Amy, did you want to come off mute?
I do. Hi. I'm from the Health Trust. I have a quick question here. Is this overall COOP planning, right, has a basic assumption that, when we're talking about communications and you're saying, texting, emailing and all that, there's a basic assumption that that structure is still functional, right? So when we're putting together our COOP, do we basically have to put together two scenarios, no? Because there's a scenario where those basic functions are working and we can continue to communicate in that way. But what happens when it's a situation where none of that is functional at this point, right? And we are actually, I think part of my struggle is in a true disaster where everything is up in arms, right? the last thing our staff is probably worried about is coming to work to provide services for our clients. That's in all honesty. So I'm trying to understand, like, how do we plan and at what level do we plan for at that stage?
Sure, and I see Marcia's hand up, so we'll go ahead, Marcia.
Mauricio's might have been up first.
Okay, so Mauricio, were you going to address Amy's comment, or let me?
No, I was gonna talk something about volunteers, okay, but I can wait and then come back around. Yeah.
Okay, so let's address Amy's question. So she's talking about in a catastrophic event, how do we go about, or how do you look at planning when she's saying two scenarios. One, when we have infrastructure available to us, like communication technologies, phone, internet, email, and when we don't. And also the concern about staff wanting to, or maybe not being as available to focus on their work responsibilities, because in a catastrophic event, they're going to focus on family. So, and their loved ones. And that's exactly why we have this triangle kind of concept, and that it's important to think about, first of all, life safety and survival for your own staff and volunteers, and encouraging them to be as prepared as they can be, because Amy, you're absolutely right. Staff are not going to be thinking about work if their loved ones and family are not stable and able to be on their own doing their work. So it's encouraging as an organization to provide opportunities and resources for your staff and volunteers to be as prepared as they can be, so that there is clarity about, we want you back at work or in contact with us as soon as possible. And then in terms of the methodologies, the continuity of operations planning does need to look at different communication methodologies. So you're going to have to think about, if we don't have cell phone access or reliable email ways, what are the expectations that you can write out so that every manager and team has clarity? If I can't reach you in my normal way, is there another place where I'm supposed to check in and say I'm available or I'm not available to be talking about work? Does that help? The other thing that we talk about in those catastrophic scenarios where communication is down is also thinking about having an alternate kind of hub for communications that may be out of the area. So we talk about, if you have a sister program that's maybe located, if we're here in the Greater Bay Area, maybe in Sacramento, maybe out of state, that can serve as kind of a point of contact for your staff or each manager's team, kind of thinking about who do they want to use as a central communication hub. You could think about setting up things like a WhatsApp or a text or Facebook small groups and have check-ins happen that way. Because oftentimes, like, text messages can get through when our phone systems aren't completely available. Okay, so hopefully some of those tips helped a little bit. Marcia, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, along the same lines, but just that your staff and your volunteers are important, and you do need to communicate with them that their families are important, and that that's the very first thing that they want to take care of. So for you, when you're thinking about what your essential functions are, you have to think about, if there's only one of you, what are your essential functions if you're the only one? And are there other organizations that maybe don't have an initial essential function that you could talk to help you organize or coordinate whatever it is that you need to do? And then, as Anna said about the text does not seem to go down in most disasters so far, unless it was a cell site incident. So maintaining a text list and having those standing orders. It's like, if an earthquake happens and we have no communication, come in. Or maybe you can stop your service for 3 days. And if you can stop your service for 3 days, then everything gets more stabilized. But that would be, again, a standing order that in 72 hours, we want you to try to reach us by text. And if you can't reach us, come to the office. and we'll post a note there if at what the next steps are. So you just have to kind of keep going down that rabbit hole, asking yourself the what ifs and addressing as many as you can.
Okay. Mauricio, we're going to come to you next. What's your question?
Well, yeah, so to kind of piggyback a little bit on that, that's sort of the part that we have in place is the, you know, we will have a mass group email, a text that will go out to everybody, started from either myself or our CEO, and says, you know, is everybody okay? Please let us know, and we will stop services until we know everybody's fine and what they need first, take care of our employees first, unfortunately, or fortunately, that's what we will do. And then once we know who's available, what can be done and everything else, then we know from there, what can we go back and start doing services, right? Can we go back and cook part-time? Can we deliver part-time? I don't know, you know, roads might not be available, you know, in an earthquake situation, and hopefully it doesn't, knock on wood, doesn't happen, but maybe most of the roads wouldn't be available. So you might not even be able to get around parts of the Bay or the South Bay or whatever. So part of it first is to assess our team, and then what's available to us to deliver or to do our services, and then take it from there. That's kind of the we'll call it a spirit of what we have on our plan. A little more detail on that, but that's sort of the basic part of it on it. Now, on the volunteer part, one of the things that right now I think might be a little bit of a challenge is that we, for example, and I'm not sure where everybody else is on this, but we have mandated vaccination to our employees and also our volunteers, right? So that is also cutting down some availability of some folks who want to participate and do things with us. Not a lot. We had a couple that said, sorry, well, we won't be able to see you, and then that's fine. But that, for example, speaking of the pandemic and some of the side effects of it, is that we have to create a shield around our operation and our employees and our participants and other folks to protect them as much as we can because of what's, you know, an enemy that we cannot really see, right? So we're, you know, that's the part where it's a little different now, and it's kind of creating a little different potential problem in the future also, to be able to continue doing some of these things if something else would happen, another pandemic, another virus, something else. You know, now is, I'm afraid it's a matter of when it might happen again, not if it has going to happen again, right? So just kind of thinking ahead about how do we will manage something like this in the future. So that was just kind of more of a point or whatever, but we're starting to counter that problem now because, well, we're restricting who can help us and who we're allowing inside our doors. So
yeah, good point, Mauricio. Thank you for sharing. How about the rest of you? I mean, I think we've all had challenges in terms of looking at staffing, and for those of you who use volunteers as we navigated this past 18 months. Jody, with Alliance on Aging, do you want to share anything that you have any thoughts on today's topic? I'm calling on people. There you are, Jody. Oh, we're still muted.
Here we go. Just that I think the biggest thing for us is that our volunteers, a certain amount of them don't want to work during this time, even if it is remotely, and that's about the only way they do. And there's some things that really we need hands-on for, such as our ombudsman program. So it's been an extra burden on our staff. So I think in the future, we need to kind of look at that and see how we can be better prepared for that in an emergency situation, especially in something like the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. Marie with Vegilution, any thoughts you want to share on things that are going well for you or challenges that you're facing with your planning?
Yeah, actually, everything that Mauricio was talking about has pretty much resonated with us right now. We recently, over the pandemic, increased our farm box distribution efforts. And over the recent holidays, our farm box distribution went from, say, 500 boxes a week to over 2,500 a week. And so with that, I mean, I hear Mauricio's voice loud and clear, you know, at the height of the pandemic, we didn't have enough volunteers coming out to support us in this distribution. And so that, you know, with the availability of expanding our service, we're also, you know, suffering the loss of productivity because of volunteers not necessarily being able to join and not feeling safe to join. And so those measures around, you know, mandating vaccination for staff and volunteers for your organization is something that we're grappling with.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Marie, and thank you for all the good work that your organization does. So let's keep going. So we were talking about staffing and volunteers and thinking ahead of time of how you're using that, but think about your own, your roles too, and having some type of a succession plan is critical to continuity of operations planning. Having leadership positions that are thought about ahead of time, and how are you going to back those up? So who are your executive team members? If they're not available for any particular reason, who might they delegate those authorities and responsibilities to? Sometimes you want to think about this as your executive team. If your board is a working board of directors, you might also need to consider your board officer positions and who, say, your chair or president, if they are vested with some specific duties and responsibilities or authorities, who are they going to have next in line if they're not available? I think, you know, at any given moment in the pandemic, you know, in that first, I would say 9 months or year before we got the vaccine, I think a lot of us were on kind of pins and needles a little bit of, well, if somebody gets sick, how are we going to back those positions up? So succession planning is a critical component of continuity of operations planning, and we really encourage you to think about this. So it's not just the authorities, but it's also some of the technical skills and abilities as well, to think ahead of time if you need to do some cross training as a part of your preparedness, so that folks can step in if you can cross train folks for different responsibilities, and then be able to go 2 or 3 people deep in your chart will give you more resilience as an organization. Okay, so those things kind of go hand in hand, staffing and succession planning, and think about that as you make your way through your planning workbook or your planning triangle, or enhancing what you already have on paper. So the last segment of the planning tool is this top tier, which we focus on what we call fulfilling a broader community role. So, you know, if you, I think most all of us have had to pivot in some way over the last 18 months in how we do our work, perhaps in who we're serving, definitely who we're coordinating with, or some of these other boxes on here, whether or not you used to handle donations or now you do, or you're in need of them. So those are some of the topics at the top. And one of the first ones is disaster-specific agreements and memorandums of understanding. You know, consider what kind of agreements you want to have in place and what the content might be or the purpose might be for that relationship. We do have some sample MOUs or templates. If you want those, just give us an email or put something in the chat box and we can shoot out some more information to you. But an agreement or an MOU could be about using an alternate facility. It could be looking at a nearby church or community center, or a portion of a school building. A service agreement could be about your agency providing a service to another agency or to a government organization during a disaster. Typically, these agreements outline things like roles and responsibilities. They may have sections that talk about insurance or safety information or considerations, a description of the services or what you're agreeing to with one another, and the term and length of the agreement. And so that planning workbook that hopefully you have in front of you will have an outline of different points of considerations for an MOU. And I see a couple of you are messaging me directly that you would like a sample MOU, so we can definitely make those available. So anybody on today's call have a disaster-specific agreement or MOU in place that you want to share, and how you go about doing that? Okay. Ginny, do you want to talk a little bit from Red Cross about some of the agreements you guys have, say, for sheltering with some of the nonprofits?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not fully versed in the whole process, but our sheltering lead, Jim, he regularly reaches out to locations around Santa Clara County that would either make a great shelter or have been a shelter for us in the past. And they put together a contract stating what will this school or community center, whatever the facility may be, what services will they provide and what services will the Red Cross provide? So that comes down to like paying the bills, because eventually there is going to be costs owed to using a shelter. So we make an agreement in advance and decide how long that this agreement will be in effect for, and make sure everybody signs and holds on to copies. So that way, when we do go to a shelter, we can make sure that we all know like who we're supposed to be contacting and how things will get resolved after the emergency is over.
Great, thank you, Ginny. So Red Cross is an easy one for us to use as a sample, because they have a very specific agreement that they look to for sheltering sites. But think about your own organization services, and when you think about your mission and your essential services, who else might you need to have an agreement with? And how might you go about doing that? I know in our food sector for the pandemic, a lot of our food providers had some different agreements that they either had ahead of time or they formalized during the event for additional resources. Maybe it was trucking, forklifts, truck drivers, et cetera. There was a huge need, I think we all can recognize, in the food space for the pandemic. And our food providers, our food banks, our food distribution groups, our food pantries utilized a number of different additional resources during that time. And some of those were documented in agreements or memorandums of understanding. And so kind of following along with that thought are tracking your vital records and cost recovery. One of the important things is to be tracking when you're delivering services during an event, and especially in this longer haul. What do you need to keep track of with your inventory, the locations? How are you keeping those records? Some of the vital records that we encourage you to think about ahead of time, whether you have a deed, if you're an owner, if your organization owns your building, if you have rental agreements, insurance and accounting documents, those should all be backed up and held off-site in a secure location or on an encrypted USB drive or other electronic storage. Tracking costs in a disaster is really vitally important. So one, if your agency does need to recover some of those costs, but also if you can track those costs or contributions in a disaster, that's a huge benefit to our local communities and local government. And let me throw this to Marcia, because we've been talking about this for the pandemic. Marcia, if you want to turn on your screen, I think we've been talking about how do we, as a network in the South Bay, help our community and our government jurisdictions understand just the incredible contributions that were made for different events. The pandemic one, but also our wildfires or other smaller events. So let me let you talk at the group a little bit about tracking costs.
Tracking costs for recovery, or what we were talking about at the board meeting?
Both, any and all of it.
Okay. So if you end up having to, if you're working with local government at all, you want to track costs and track volunteer hours. Those are the two important things. If you're under contract, your contract should state specifically what the reporting requirements are for you, because when you're dealing with federal or state funds, it starts to get kind of detailed, and you want to have a process in place so that you don't get caught off guard. For volunteer hours, if you track your volunteer hours and you assign them specifically to specific tasks related to the disaster, you can share that information with the government, and they can claim the dollar value of those hours. And it offsets what they, I still don't understand how it works, but it's an offset. It requires government to pay less than they would have to. And so there is a website that has like the current dollar value of a volunteer hour in each state, and it's significant. So those volunteer hours are really important. And then what we were talking about at the board meeting on Tuesday was that we really, CADRE is going to make an attempt. I'm still trying to figure out how, but we're going to make an attempt to capture data from all of you on what you did during the disaster. And I'm hoping that maybe you'd prepare that anyway for an annual report or for a fundraising drive. It's like, what was your impact? How many people did you serve? How many hours of volunteer time were there? How many pounds of food, or did you deliver meals, or did you talk to people on the phone, whatever it was, because each of you did amazing work, each of you. But collectively, I want to compile the information, because I think we as the nonprofit sector should brag a little bit more to the government about what we did for you, because we're voluntarily doing this. We're not by law required to help the community. And so in order to just establish the relationship and the value of the volunteers, or of the voluntary organizations, all of you, I think it's really important that we share a big document that shows everything that we did. So no matter how big or small you are, your numbers count. If you already have some data like that, just email it to that admin email and we'll start to capture it. We might call you if you don't, because again, I'm not sure how we're going to compile this right now, but I think it's really important to show the countywide impact.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. And Marie with Edulution's asking if you can share the website on the volunteer hours offset. And I know we have that somewhere, so we'll get that. If we may need to email it to you, Marie, if she can't find it in the next couple of minutes. But let's keep going. So vital records, cost recovery, in the ENLA booklet, the one you see the screen has the green boxes, that's their formatting. There's some other tracking sheets and thoughts around how you can document vital records and cost recovery kinds of data. I'm going to move a little quickly through our last couple of slides. Coordination with others is knowing your local resources. They may be your only source of assistance. So who do you form a connection with to share resources? I think one of the greatest examples we saw recently was how our food providers all banded together for COVID and had weekly phone calls and really kind of stepped up and coordinated with one another and shared resources and expertise, and really did a phenomenal service to the community. So there's key organizations and businesses that you might want to think about ahead of time and and document. This is important because sometimes this information really resides only with your executive director in terms of some of those relationships. And you want to have that in your plan. You want to have that shared throughout your executive leadership or management. So it's not all nested with just one person with their cell phone contacts and personal relationships. So look at coordination with others. And then our last box is, a recovery plan, planning for recovery activities, and how a fancy term for demobilization is a fancy term for how do we get back to normal, or what is a new normal. So thinking about all those things and putting that into some kind of a page within your continuity of operations plan, or if it's a really robust document and you're a larger organization, sometimes you have a completely separate document that's called a recovery plan. So with that, I'm going to move us over to a video testimonial from the Vermont Food Bank, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Okay, so give me one moment to switch screens for you, and we'll listen to our little guy here. Let's see, did I do that correctly? Hold on one second. I did. Okay. Here we go.
You to be available. So with all this information, you're now ready to create a business continuity plan. Enjoy. Okay, so let's look at those 5 steps. So just take an example of the Vermont food shelf. For example, mission is to support people who need food during a crisis or poverty time. So they have food that they need to provide to people. And when you look at organization, these are people who have to move the food shelf, they move the food around, they have to deliver it, they have to make sure that they can bring this food in. They're working with other organizations to make sure they've got the right food at the right times to support the people. Now the third area is risk. There's a lot of different risks. One is power, because your power, you need the power to make sure that the food, if it's cold, needs to be refrigerated, it's maintained. Because if you don't have refrigeration for the food, it can be spoiled within a day. So power is one of the risks that you need to consider. Even logistics, to get the trucks moving from point A to point B is important. Getting donors, where does the food come from? Where's the money come from? All these things you need to address because they're important from a risk standpoint. Processes, logistics, how to move food around, how to keep it cold, where do you store it, how do you get it from point A to B, how do you identify your donors? All these things are part of your processes that you need to think about. And with all this information now, you've identified what your mission is, you know what's important from a process standpoint, you know what risk you're most concerned about, your people understand that. With all this information, now you have the information, the knowledge to create the business continuity plan that you need to protect the business and the agency.
For the Vermont Food Bank, really going through this workshop and being able to tap into this incredible expertise, I think it helped us to realize how very important it is for us to have a solid and living plan. We had a disaster plan in place, and going through this workshop really helped us to realize that it's something that needs to be constantly paid attention to, that it's something that we need to be updating regularly, sharing with all of the staff at the food bank. I think taking the workshop with IBM also inspired all of us, frankly, to want to dig in more and dig deeper and do a better job of this. I talked with at least 4 food shelves, and Rob was one of them. And every single one of them said, thank you so much, this was great. We don't have a plan in place, and having a toolkit, basically, which is what you gave us, to step by step create a plan, however simple it might be at first, is something that none of them have ever had access to. So being able to provide that access to, again, this critical network out there. Food is a basic human right, and people need food to live. So we really need to make sure that the Charitable Food Network is prepared to respond to disaster.
Okay, So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a sense of, the continuity of operations planning and, what kinds of things can go in there. I'm going to launch our evaluation poll. This is what we need to keep our funders happy for our program. So if you wouldn't mind answering a couple of questions for us as we begin to close out today's program. There are just 7 questions. If you could do that for us for our funding purposes. So, and I'll give you a few other comments. You're welcome to continue to put questions in the chat box. And I know Marcia put in there all the information that was requested about volunteer hours. And so what you have on your screen is the remainder of our community preparedness training series. And our next workshop after today is on Tuesday, October 5th. It is on disaster donations management, and we have a national expert speaker coming to join us and share information with you. That's Charlene Sargent with the Adventist Community Services, and she is a board member for the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. So all of these sessions are on the screen. We have a couple of regional trainings that are also happening across the greater Bay Area. There's one coming up in November on long-term recovery. And the other session I really want to highlight in closing today's program is we are offering 2 what we call open forums for technical assistance. So if you are working on your plans and you're coming across questions or challenges like Amy or Mauricio were sharing, or you just want to talk with others who are going through this planning process at this moment. The first Friday of November and the first Friday of December, we're hosting open technical assistance forums, and we'll open up a Zoom and just chat with one another and provide you with additional resources like the volunteer stuff, or the, if you want to look more into any one of our planning topics and have some questions, want sample language, etc. That's what those South Bay open forum sessions are all about. And with that, I think I'm going to throw it to Marcia for a couple of closing remarks as we have our poll finishing out.
Well, as usual, Anna, great job, and thank you for everyone's participation. We will do some follow-up meetings that was part of the tabletop exercises we did do. We'll do some more in-depth meetings. I think we may have to do one just on creating MOUs and just talk about that. Because we do want to get you beyond this. Okay, now we know what we need to do. How do we do it? We'll get into some of the more challenging topics. If you want to suggest topics that you'd like us to include in future webinars, please you could put it in the chat or email us, and we will make sure that we help move you forward, because that moves us all forward. So with that, just thank you, everyone. Thank you for filling out the poll as well, because that's how we get paid.
All right, and we will, be back here on October 5th, and we'll look forward to interacting with you in an open forum. Kind of consider those like open office hours. Like if you were in your college professor, you wanted to go in and talk to somebody, share ideas, ask questions of one another. That's what that forum's meant for. So we hope to see you in one of our future sessions, and thank you all for joining us.